Welcome everyone this evening to our webinar with Lyndsey Smith. We're going to get started right away. Thank you for joining us tonight. My name is Caitlin Duncan, Executive Director at SaskSoils. And tonight's webinar is called Grazing for Grain Growers, You Don't Need Livestock. Thanks for being here, everyone. Whether you're a longtime SaskSoils member or this is your first event with us, we're so glad you've taken the time to be here tonight. At SaskSoil, we're passionate about helping producers build healthier soils, more resilient soils through practical farmer-driven management solutions. And tonight's topic with Lyndsey is a great example of that. When we hear the word grazing, many of us, including myself, immediately think about owning cattle. As you'll hear this evening, incorporating grazing into a grain operation doesn't necessarily mean becoming a livestock producer. There are opportunities to partner with livestock owners, integrate cover crops, improve soil health, cycle nutrients, and create additional value for your farming operation, all without owning a herd. Before we get into it tonight, I'd like to take just a few minutes to introduce SaskSoils for all of you who might be new to our organization. I have just a quick few slides to go through and just to talk about how we work with producers across Saskatchewan to support soil health. So SaskSoil, we're a not-for-profit producer-based organization. We were founded in 1987 by a group of very progressive farmers. That's almost 40 years ago now, and we look at the relationship between agricultural practices and environmental stewardship. Our mission is to advance ag systems that improve the land and environment for future generations. We're also a registered charity, and we do have an annual membership as well for $50 a year for producers. So if you're not a member, I encourage you to join us. What do? We share knowledge. We've got a variety of different events that we do this through. So we've got monthly webinars, which you're here tonight on. We have practical on-farm demonstrations or field days, and then we also do advocacy for BMPs at the provincial and federal level. Tonight's webinar is supported by the Farm Program through Farmers for Climate Solutions. They're a large supporter of SaskSoil, so we really appreciate their support. We've got a very enthusiastic board, largely producers that I'm not going to go through everyone here, but really enthusiastic and creative in the way they look at soil health on their operation. So we're really glad to have this group with us as leading the way. We've got a small but mighty team of contractors that run SaskSoils and a variety of field days. We had our first one today at Vanscoy, and I've got a few more coming up in the next few weeks here. We're going to have a booth at Ag in Motion as well this year, so please come by our plot. We're going to have 5 different field trials with looking at different seed varieties and pesticide mixtures and different soil health practices. So we hope to see you at our Ag in Motion booth this year. All right, so I'm going to get into a little bit more. Just a little bit of housekeeping before we start. Presentation is being recorded and it will be available after the event. We are using the meeting format, as you will see. So rather than a traditional webinar, that helps make it a little bit more interactive. And if you're comfortable doing so, we'd love to have you turn your camera on. It's always nice for our speaker to see who's joining us, and it helps create more of an interactive style to the presentation. Feel free to ask questions throughout the session by using the chat or Q&A feature. You can also ask questions directly after the discussion as well. We'll set aside a little bit of dedicated time at the end. If we don't get to the question this evening, we will do our best to follow up afterward. So without further ado, I'm going to tell you a little bit about Lyndsey Smith. I know that most of you are very familiar with her, I'm sure. She's a professional communicator and ag influencer. Lyndsey's a communicator, broadcaster, and sheep farmer based near Ottawa, Ontario. She's originally from Manitoba and for a brief time was in Saskatchewan. She brings a unique perspective that bridges both livestock and grain production. Along with her partner, Chris Moore, she co-founded Shady Creek Lamb Company, a vegetation management company that is now entering its 9th season of grazing sheep on a utility scale solar sites in Ontario. Over the past 4 years, they've also been extending their grazing season well into the winter by grazing grainland, much to the delight of the grain farmers they work with. In addition to farming, Lyndsey is a familiar voice in Canadian agriculture through her work in agricultural media, where she's known for bridging practical, real-world conversations with farmers and researchers to audiences across the country. Lyndsey's also the mother of 3 kids. By her own admission, drinks far too much coffee, which is probably related to everything she does. And I hope she is tonight because it's 9:30 p.m. It's bedtime in Ontario. So Glad she could make it fit us in tonight. We're thrilled to have Lyndsey with us this evening to share her experiences, insights, and practical ideas. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to you, Lyndsey.
Thank you, Caitlin, and welcome here, everyone. And if you're watching the recording, glad that you took the time as well. Super excited to have this discussion. It's something we're incredibly passionate about here with Shady Creek Lamb, and I am really glad that you mentioned that I did spend. I grew up in Manitoba, spent now most of my life there, and did spend 3.5 years in Saskatchewan as well. Lived in the Lumsden area. And of course, I've traveled extensively in Western Canada and worked with Western Canadian farmers. And I think that's important because I don't want to be one of those Ontario people, which I do not consider myself an Ontario person. I don't want to be one of those Ontario people walking into the prairies and saying, this is what you should do. That's not what I'm about. That's not what I'm going to do. But I do think there's value in sharing our experiences over the past now well, we're approaching our fifth season of drastically reducing our stored feed costs by extending our grazing season. And it really only happens because we are grazing a variety of different things on other people's land, on grain farmers' land. And so that's what we're going to get into. Please, as Caitlin said, please feel free to drop your questions as we go in the chat. I don't mind being interrupted. But if you would like to leave them to the end, we can have a great conversation then as well. I am going to try and be mindful of the time, but maybe if we're approaching the end of my 45 minutes ish, give me the old crook across the neck and I'll get going here. So because I do want to leave time for questions and conversation, I think that's really one of the most valuable parts of having something like this webinar and having the people on it is being able to talk about what's possible and what we've done. So this is who we are. That's my partner Chris, his dog Dash. We we started grazing the way we do, which we do as Caitlin mentioned. We are paid to graze. We graze a 200-acre commercial scale solar site, and we did that because we couldn't really expand any other way. We live in Ottawa city limits, and land is incredibly expensive. We are up against developers and there was no way really to add to our land base without either taking on crippling debt, potentially, or moving really. And it just wasn't in the cards for us. So we've always kind of done something differently. And one of the points that I often bring up in any of these discussions is sometimes you have to be willing to do what other people aren't. And that's really how you can make some things happen. So I am, as I said, from Western Canada. Chris we now live on what was his grandparents' dairy farm here in the Ottawa Valley. And you may recognize me. And if you don't, from realagriculture.com and Real Ag Radio, please go check it out and follow along. We've been doing that for now 14 years I've been there, and it is my great pleasure to be able to cover agriculture from the media perspective. So we do that. But really what we're here tonight to talk about is the grazing of cover crops, crop residue, annual forage, you name it, we've done it in the last couple seasons. And I'll walk through some of the different setups that we've done. And honestly, some of them and how we sort of started this was sort of by chance, a little bit of risk on our part, but it really has translated to some really beautiful partnerships that are working incredibly well, not just for us, but really for the grain farmers. And that's really the important part. So for some reason, there we go. And if I get really laggy, somebody let me know. I am on although I'm in city limits, I'm on rural Wi-Fi. So there you go. So I want to go through just quickly how we approach this and how we have. Our very first grazing of, sort of cover crop, shoulder season, that sort of thing, was actually in a year where the winter wheat crop was incredibly early, came in really early. It was actually off and harvested, which this year seems pretty similar. It was done by end of July, which is even for here is very early. And we were a little short of stored feed. We were still, this is, 5 years ago, still renovating some of our pastures here at home and our hay ground. And so there was a farmer not far from us who was harvesting his wheat. It was quite early. And so Chris approached him and said, could we put in a cover crop, maybe oats and peas, maybe, something along those lines, something basic that we might be able to take for hay, for stored feed. And he said yes. And we planted that. So we planted it, and this is important because we'll get into some of these details. We planted it, we paid for the seed, and we put it in with our drill. Um, a couple weeks later, when it was time, so well into September, I think we gave it about that 60 days. Looking at the weather, we were like, "Hey, great growth on it. We're going to roll it up." But there was something that happened between the first day we put in the first field and then the next field. We planted the first field August 5th. We got rain and rain and rain, and we didn't get back to the second field till August 10th. And the difference in those, or sorry, August 15th, the difference in those 10 days was the difference between having enough biomass to make it worth it to roll it up for stored feed and not worth it. And so we asked the farmer, as we went out there to cut it for feed, there just wasn't enough in the second field. And because we graze solar, we have all the infrastructure. We have temporary fences, we have movable water, we have guardian dogs, and we have sheep that know how to graze. And we said, could we graze off this cover crop? Um, and he said yes. And so that was year one. And it went well. We had a bit of a coyote issue, but water wasn't an issue. The farmer was happy, and so happy, in fact, that the next season, as the winter wheat came off, and it came off a little later, Chris hadn't called him yet. He was like, well, we'll see. We don't necessarily need hay. It's a little later. And instead, the farmer called us and said, hey, by the way, I put in oats and peas. Do you guys want to come back and graze it on that ground? And that to me was just like, oh, okay. So I guess it worked. And he related that even just in that 1 year, he's been retired from dairy for about 20 years. And he really missed the manure, the animal impact, the manure impact in his rotation. And he saw, even on those two different fields, one where we took the feed and one where we grazed, he saw some really positive benefits even from that first year. So much so that he was like, let's do this again. So that's one farmer. We'll continue with that this year. Another farmer had planted a kitchen sink kind of cover crop after a wheat crop, and it was growing gangbusters. So much so that he was actually worried about what he was going to do with it because it was going to create a mat and a mess. And I know I shouldn't brag. I know it doesn't always rain in Saskatchewan. It rains here most of the time. And so we had a whole bunch of biomass, and he was terrified of what he was going to do with it because he's a no-till or a min-till, and he didn't want to have to work it in. And so again, we said, okay, well, we'll bring the sheep. We'll see what we can do. And they did a phenomenal job. It helped cycle those nutrients. It helped reduce the biomass. And again, super happy. And we've expanded our relationship since then. One of the other things we've done, and we'll talk about winter in a little bit, the third situation that we got ourselves into was actually a seed grower who, because they're a seed grower, they have a lot of different rules about what can grow in what field. And sometimes they put in a cover crop, an annual, like a full season cover crop, basically to create some space between seed varieties, etc. And they, again, no longer had cattle. Their family had cattle, but when he looked out on what was growing there, he was like, there is just so much great feed here. I don't want to just, work it in or whatever. And so again, he said, hey, can you guys bring the sheep? And we said, sure, we'll do it. And the next year, we had this amazing open fall. And I don't want to make it sound like the weather's always great here because it's not. Last year was terrible. And last week it rained 115 millimeters and everything is sopping wet and drowning. Anyway, but one year we had this amazing open fall, so much so that well into October, there were people that tried to make hay. So they actually cut it, and it looked like maybe we'd have enough time to actually roll it up and make hay. It didn't happen, turned cold. The days are just so short in October. But it was already in the swath. And so that same farmer said, okay, guys, what do you think about swath grazing? And we were like, let's give it a whirl because the feed was already down. It was all there. And lo and behold, so we brought the sheep, brought all the equipment. We grazed until well into January. on that swath. The sheep found the swath. A couple times Chris had to go with just on a quad with a little blade, show them where the next swath was based on snowfall. And once they were on it, they would just dig through it and away they go. And this is with sheep. Cattle are even more capable of doing some of these things, obviously. And so that's what we did that season. And we cleaned up all those swaths under the snow. We grazed well into January. And the if people don't know this about sheep, sheep are they will have twins, triplets, etc. Mostly, yes, genetics, but also based on their feed when they're actually breeding. And we breed midwinter, so we bred these ewes on this swath grazing, and we had so many triplets and quads. We didn't know what to do with them. It was actually like a bit of a problem because we don't want triplets and quads, especially on grass. But it was just such great feed, and they did such a great job that it worked really well. So, is it all sunshine and roses? No, but those are the situations that we've worked in, and sort of things around that. Um, we hear this a lot in Ontario as well. And so I know that there are challenges to grazing on non-pasture or hay ground. The first one usually is yes, I don't want cows. I don't have cows. I'm not going to get cows. And my answer is I don't think you should. If you're a grain grower and you're good at growing grain and you like growing grain, you're probably not a livestock producer and you probably like having a winter off. But if you are a livestock producer, you've got to feed animals all winter. And so it actually can work out really well if you're open to it. Um, the other thing that we get, especially around here, is we often get we no longer have fence lines. And spoiler alert, even if there are still some old fences on some of these fields, we don't use them. We don't trust them. Old page wire fences, old fence lines, it would be way more work to try and patch them all up or depend on them. We use temporary fencing. I'll show you some of it in a little bit. And we bring it all. And even with a decent fence, we don't use it. We don't need permanent fences. It's okay that they've been ripped out. A shorter season or it doesn't rain, these are, of course, serious questions. It just means that, and like Caitlin, of course, will share with what SaskSoil is doing at Ag Emotion, etc. What you end up grazing might just look different, and we can talk about a few of those options and how it might work. Obviously, in super arid areas, that's maybe not necessarily going to work unless we're talking about full season covers. Maybe it's 1 year, an annual forage where you don't lose the productivity because you've got somebody who's willing to take it as forage and pay you for it. But we'll talk about some of the agronomic reasons why this can be just so incredibly impactful for the grain grower in a little bit. Don't want cows? That's cool. You don't have to have cows. Water is one of the major considerations. It's completely surmountable. This is something that is solvable. It is just like the fences. It is something to address. But we graze sheep, and sheep are a desert animal. They are much smaller. They're very efficient. They eat snow in the winter. And if they are on really green feed, like often with a cover crop or crop aftermath, that sort of stuff, unless it's corn stalks, which we have grazed corn stalks as well, their water use is actually, their water demand is quite low, like really low. Like for the most part, we always bring water, but it is our guardian dogs that will drink it. It is not the sheep for the most part that drink much. Cattle are different. Cattle obviously have a way higher water need. And if you are well into, let's say, a fall or into early winter, you do have to worry about water access, water freezing, temporary water sources, etc. So water is one of the ones, I don't know, like everything, it is probably the most important thing to sort out. Again, it is solvable, but it is one of the things to consider and to think about whenever you're grazing, full stop, but especially when you're grazing away from home, off site, all those sorts of fun things. Okay, so some people ask us, hang on, caffeine time. That's important, guys. We often get, okay, so why, right? And we ask the grain farmers that we work with, we want to hear their experience, the good, the bad, what they're okay with, what they're challenged by, etc. Some people don't really like dogs. that's a consideration. We have to bring dogs. We have serious coyote pressure, and dogs are just the most useful thing we have found. Sometimes we have to deal with, a neighbor not liking a dog or a dog barking. That's a consideration. There's always the question of compaction. I think I have it later as well. Um, and so these are some of the things we talk through. But I think, especially for this audience, if we back up a step and we think about the ground itself, the soil itself, and what a grain farmer is trying to accomplish, and especially someone who is aware of soil health, is trying to improve it, I'm a firm believer that we cannot really improve soil health without livestock in the mix somewhere. And maybe that's a manure application. It doesn't mean that it's grazing. But I don't think you can buy a hug and a bug and a jug that is going to replicate what livestock can do on soil. It doesn't mean they need to be there every year. It doesn't mean they need to actually necessarily graze. You can apply manure, etc. But even a 1 year and 4, a 1 year and 6 of an animal impact, I just don't know how you can replicate that, even by use of, let's say, a green manure or those sorts of things of something that you're going to work in. There's just so much benefit to that cycling of what that animal does. And if we think about where we live, especially on the prairies evolved with large ruminants working their way through and across the prairies. That is part of the ecosystem of what our soils need. It's what helps build our organic matter. It helps to cycle nutrients. All of these things, it feeds all that soil biology. And I just don't know how you replicate it without adding livestock, at least once in a while. Now, there's also, as I said, there are also some pretty significant um, issues in growing grain that we're trying to grapple with. Just last night, I hosted my show on Mondays that I host about agronomy. We talked about water hemp and Palmer amaranth. And for anyone who doesn't know those, they're not in Saskatchewan yet, but Manitoba is dealing with them. Water hemp especially, it is like a kochia in that it is incredibly genetically diverse. It outcrosses. It is now multi-herbicide resistant across the board. Um, Mowing, crop competition, grazing things off, fall seeded crops, cover crops that suppress weeds. These are actual tools that grain growers potentially need to address some of the very difficult weed problems that are out there. And again, there has to be an economical reason to put things like a fall seeded crop or an annual forage or even short term perennial forage. And to me, having a plan to have animals come in and graze off, or I mean, you could bale it off and you could use it as stored feed, whatever. But to me, if you're willing to work with a livestock producer and livestock producers are willing to adapt to actually being fully mobile, there's a real win-win-win here for the soil and for both farmers. And I think that as we move forward with really complicated weed issues, salinity, like one of the best things you could do for saline areas is, okay, so maybe the kochia grows, let the kochia grow and mow it before it sets seed to try and deal with some of these saline areas. I mean, you could put a saline tolerant forage in there potentially. You could and graze it off or bale it off, whatever the case may be. There are just so many ways that if you get creative enough, we can actually start to work in livestock back onto grain ground in ways that benefits everybody. So, okay. So often we say this tongue in cheek because we do raise sheep and sheep are very difficult and very management intensive, but we remind ourselves to adapt, innovate, and overcome. And I do recognize, again, that I live where it rains. And so our experience is not one that I expect to be mirrored in Saskatchewan or in the prairies. But there are aspects of it that I think will fit just about anywhere. It just all depends on what you can come up with and what will work. So, one of the things that also will come up, yes, is what about water? Again, this is a very simple setup from where we were at grazing off the cover crop after the seed mix that was in there. We have fully solar energized fencers. And for us, we can usually our totes are on wheels. We've repurposed all sorts of different hay wagons and grain wagons and all sorts of things that carry water around. But realistically, once you have a water source and you have a plan, it's not bad. But also have a plan and then have a plan B. One of the big differences that does come up, especially and it relates to water, is you do have to think about how many animals you're going to have. Cattle, of course, work up ground a lot more than sheep do. And if the water stays in one place and they're always coming back to it, obviously you do have to think about how much they're going to tear up that ground, potentially around a water source. And that is one thing that is a benefit where for smaller animals, they're a little less hard on the ground. At the same time, so long as you're really strategic in where you put your mineral and salt, where you put your water to keep them and move them around, maybe keep them out of the low spots, etc. Most grain farmers would be very happy with what the field looks like after. Any compaction, like livestock like to walk in trails, right? You've seen it. Sheep love to make them. Even in a 2-day paddock, they will make their little trail. However, any compaction that does happen is just so surface, and it really, I mean, it disappears in no time. So, cattle again, a bit different, but not insurmountable. Okay, so one of the keys to this, to any change, any grazing, any adaptive grazing program is that usually is labor intensive. And that's, you can't get around the fact that putting up temporary fences, taking down temporary fences is labor intensive. You can make it, I will say, because we have sheep, we pretty much rely on 4 strands. We can get by with 3 or even 2, depending if they're mature ewes or if we've got lambs in the mix. But fencing is one of, again, it's one of the first pushbacks is we don't have fences anymore. How are you going to turn out cows? If your cows are electric fence trained, you can use electric fence, and it doesn't have to be the super labor intensive job that some people are maybe used to, but it probably requires investing in some of the tech that's out there. So there are things. So this is our setup. This is a Rappa. It's a winder. So it yes, puts out 4 strands at a time, but it also takes up 4 strands at a time. And that is a huge, because we have to do 4 strands, that can be just a tangled mess if you're trying to do it by hand wheel, etc. So this is our setup. It is really a truly amazing kit that we've brought in from the UK. There is a rep now in Alberta. We are the rep here in Ontario, but we worked hard to bring this into Canada. It took us a couple of years to convince them to sell these units here, because up until this, we were using, yes, some hand reels, but mostly net fencing, which is so labor intensive. But there are similar and other ideas like a range ward and some of these other setups that if you truly value your time, and especially if you're going to be grazing your own ground all summer, etc., or you're instituting a rotational grazing program, once you've invested in the tech, you may as well use it as long as possible. So for us, having because we solar graze, we have to move our sheep daily every 2 days so that they actually do a really good job where they are, which means we have to have really great fencing equipment. So we've made the investment in it, and I will tell you that the savings in labor alone essentially paid for the unit the first year. And that, like, to me, that is just, we're really bad as farmers in valuing our time. I get that it's not a cash cost, but every hour you spend doing something is an hour you don't spend doing something else. So if you're spending 5 hours fencing in 3 days when it could be 1 hour, that's 4 more hours you could be spending doing something else entirely. Maybe it's herd health, maybe it's taking a marketing course, maybe it's just spending time with your family. But all of that adds up and is really important. And so for us, we ran the numbers and we knew that while it was a cash outlay at first, we would gain it back in, yes, hard costs because we do have a summer student, but also in time, which is less of a cash cost, but it is a real cost, and it really does exist. And for us, it means so. For example, last fall it was November. The weather was miserable. We were grazing out on corn stalks, and Chris put up a week's worth of fences in 45 minutes. And to be able to fence a week's worth of feed in 45 minutes when it is miserable and cold in November is worth its weight in gold. And so that's what having the Rappa winder has done for us. But solving that issue, that labor issue, is a huge one. But it also is, it's an example that just because there are no fences doesn't mean you can't graze a piece of ground. So this is about, I don't know, let's say 2 miles from our place. This was a winter wheat field that we're sitting in. This was all he put in was oats. And last year, it was very, very dry. I won't call it a drought. It wasn't, but it was very dry. So this was in, as you can tell by the corn, it was probably like into, and based on the trees, late September, early October. And normally this would have grown to be like 2 feet high, but it didn't rain. So that's what was there. But it still turned out to be on this particular field, those oats still fed our entire ewe flock for a full week. And so that was worth moving them there. And we can talk trailering and all those sorts of things too. That is a consideration. How far do you have to move them? We use a commercial hauler. We have enough sheep that we fill a pot and we move them by the pot load. For short distances, it's by far the most efficient way to do it. We do walk them down the road. They're This is where cattle have the advantage. Cattle move down the road a lot better, and people seem to respect cattle moving down the road a lot better. Um, I don't know why. People see sheep and I don't know, they just think we're a pain, which maybe we are. Anyway, what about winter? This could be a whole other webinar, so I will just, as I noted before, but I will note it here, we outwinter our sheep all winter. Um, yes, it gets cold here, not for as long as the prairies, but as a growing up just outside of Winnipeg, I know what a real cold winter is. We don't get that. We do get -30 for like a week, but it's a damp winter, and yes, that matters. But what's most important is that for us, we do have wool sheep. We don't do much with the wool. The wool's value is exactly this. They live outside all winter. They have access to trees. They have access to some windbreaks, but they outwinter. And we roll out our bales. If we had cattle, we would do bale grazing and leave them whole, but sheep just aren't big enough to push the bales around. So we unroll our bales, but we do it on our pasture ground. We do it on our hay ground. It cycles all the nutrients. We didn't have to build a big barn. Um, if you haven't figured it out by now, we don't have a lot of money. So we have to do things really smart because we can't afford to do the big infrastructure things. And so it also means, though, that like we will graze. Our goal is to graze as far into the winter as we can because even a week of saved stored feed, anyone who has livestock knows that you work so hard to put those bales up and to put that feed up, and every saved bale matters. And so we'll graze our sheep. Sometimes we'll do third cut or fourth cut if we've had a really good year. They'll come home and they'll graze it. They will graze through the snow, but we do feed on top of the snow. Once we start unrolling bales, then we will strategically sort of spread them out over the fields. But I would say that this is one of and I've done a few interviews on this. I know Saskatchewan is pushing for this concept of outwintering, which is a really lovely term. I think it just sounds so beautiful. But for us, I mean, yes, we could yard them, but then we have to clean out the manure. We're concentrating all those nutrients where we don't need them. We it just works so much better to make sure that they have really good feed, they're in good body condition, they've got wool on their backs, they've got a bit of shelter, and that's all they need. And frankly, so we treat our sheep here at least a little bit more like I would say Western cattle get treated, which is they have to work for us, they have to live outside, and I don't think that's a bad thing. Anyway, there are, of course, benefits for the livestock producer, and this comes into, as we'll talk about in just a moment, because I know I'm running out of time. The agreement part of all of this is that it is not free feed, so that's one thing. Just like when we talk about solar grazing, everyone's like, oh, what? Oh, great, you get all that free feed. It's not free feed because of that labor component. it requires an investment in fences and in fencers and in dogs and waterers. It's not free feed. And there is a value to the grain producer as well, a pretty significant one. So for most of our setups, um, we have paid to put a cover crop in or put a crop in, but most of the time the farmer is doing it for their own reasons. They're paying for it, and then we come in and we graze it off. And those benefits are enough that they don't have to have livestock, worry about livestock or any of the infrastructure, and they are very happy for us to come and graze it off. And that is we and cash does not necessarily change hands. Depending on the setup, though, we have paid for seed, we have put it in the ground. It all just comes down to what's going to work for what field and what we plan on doing it for, or if we plan to try and make stored feed, all those sorts of things. Again, these are all things that because this is a partnership, not in the legal sense, of course, but you could call it a joint venture if you really wanted to. It's really important to actually work together on talk about things like, if you're going to be using guardian dogs, are they worried about them? What might look like? Are there water sources? If it's not working, how quickly can you get the livestock out? These are things that you should consider and think about, but it should all be discussed ahead of time. Um, I'm not saying you need a big signed contract. However, putting some things on paper is not a bad idea. It doesn't mean any lawyer needs to make money about this, but you should have pretty clear roles and responsibilities of what are the expectations here, and then revisit it. So let's say you've got a neighbor who's got a kochia problem and they're trying to figure out a way to get ahead of it, and maybe an annual forage or mowing it or grazing in that area or something, whatever it is, looks like a good option. We also live by the premise that if you don't ask, the answer is always no. So maybe it's going out there and saying, hey, could we work together on this? Um, and then be able to talk about like what might that look like and those sorts of things. I will say, this is work life and also farm life. Um, Sometimes neighbors, but what I mean by neighbors is where you end up putting livestock. You do have to think about sometimes you're dealing with other people, looky-loos that like to drive by, stop, take pictures, and not everybody wants to do that, and I get that. So that's something to consider as well. Is that if you're really used to your own land and you don't want to stray too far, I get that. That's totally cool. People can be the worst. Anyway, I've covered a lot of this, so I'll just leave it up here while we because I'm running out of time, while we open it up for questions. But this was actually, so this is a picture of the very first year we did this with the one producer that he had planted this kitchen sink mix after winter wheat. It was early, so that it was the first week of August that it went in, which is very early for us. It rained, and it just took off like gangbusters. So we actually put, these are our ewe lambs, and that's an important thing, is that we do need to manage the production stage of the animal to what the feed is. I would never put growing ewe lambs on corn stalks, for example. There just isn't the feed value there that they're going to need. But on this really great, really rich feed, they grew gangbusters. They did fantastic. We were very comfortable bringing ewe lambs there to grow out. So that is a consideration. But there, in here, I think in this list, there is the idea of like losing a year. Like if you put in an annual forage or an annual cover crop, you've lost a year of production from the grain perspective. I think that if you can incorporate the grazing side, and work out some of those benefits, it starts to pencil out a lot nicer, potentially. Because if you've got cattle, you should probably be handing them some beef at the end of the year. We like to share lamb too. Okay, so this is the last thought I'll maybe leave everybody with is, because we've run into this, not so much in our own neighborhood, we love our neighbors, but we run into it in agriculture in general, is that there seems to be sometimes that we can't let somebody else get ahead. It's okay if we both win on this one, right? Like it's okay that someone with livestock has little access to some land that they didn't before, and it's okay that the grain farmer ends up with some manure that they didn't pay for. This is a mutually beneficial arrangement, and of course super beneficial for the soil, which is what we're all really striving for, and it's okay that we both win. And also tell me how it goes. if anybody in this organization or watching this ends up trying something or trying something different, would love to hear from you. Would love to know how it goes. That Shady Creek Lamb is our Instagram. Um, we are on Facebook, but I hate Facebook. So anyway, Instagram is great. That is Chris though on the Instagram handle. So he is much less appropriate than I am. He's very inappropriate. So just so you know, but that is my email address. Love to hear from people. You can find me on social as well. Real Loud Lindsay on Instagram as well. I don't use Twitter anymore, so don't even try it. And yeah, I like emails, but don't call me. So I didn't put my phone number. Although it's still a Manitoba number, everybody. I kept my 204 and I have had it for a very long time. So there you go. Okay. I'm going to stop. Well, I'll leave it up for a minute. I see that there are some things in the chat. I hope they're
Mm.
questions. Um, ask away. Caitlin, do you want to ask them? See
Sure.
if you
Yeah.
remember them?
Thanks so much, Lindsay, for sharing your knowledge and experience. That was really interesting. I come from a strictly grain farm, so I'm kind of sitting here being like, what? Like,
Yes.
it's there's not cattle for miles from where I come from. So,
Mm-hmm.
this conversation is definitely a bit of an edge for
Yeah.
the area of the province that I come from. So,
Yeah.
but it's interesting, right? And maybe at some point we get
Yeah.
there in terms of animal integration.
So yes, and I will say like even for around here, like we are the only sheep farmers around
Mm.
here.
Yeah.
And there aren't a lot of cattle left. BSE hit here as well.
Mm.
I'm in a part of the province that would have had a lot of feeder like feedlots and even cow calf that BSE really moved out. I think that one of the differences though is that like especially because the cattle markets are so much better, um,
Yeah.
and the sheep industry is too, that I I get that there's like huge areas where there's just no livestock. There's none. But that doesn't mean that like there isn't somebody who's like maybe we diversify and maybe we
Yeah.
add
Yeah.
them, right? So and that is I think where you might see some of these differences on a
Yeah.
small scale, of course. But
I
yeah.
think we're seeing more and more of that, definitely
Yeah.
more interest in diversifying in that way.
Yeah.
So we've got a fair number of questions in the chat. I'll maybe just start
Cool.
at the top.
Sure.
Stuart Chutter wants to know how many strands of polymer is used for sheep? Polywire,
Okay,
sorry.
polywire. Yeah, so great question. And hi, Stuart. So lovely you could join us. So yeah, so we can get away with two, um, but that is typically only mature ewes, and it helps if they're relatively short wool. So like, which usually doesn't happen. And also hungry sheep don't tend to test fences. So if they have a lot of feed and there's no reason for them to go through a fence, we can get away with two. For the most part, though, we don't go lower than three just because it's a visual barrier. So the wrapper that we have there's blue and orange wire that you saw. The orange apparently I learned is high. Sorry, blue is highly visible to animals, so including deer and that sort of stuff, which keeps them out or at least lets them jump it. Um, so three just feels we're comfortable with three. Right now in the solar, we're at four because we have lambs outside. And so do lambs sometimes get through still? Yes, but they go back to their mom. It's not the end of the world. But usually three. Cattle, of course, you could probably so for cattle, one would be fine. Like I'd be very comfortable, obviously, with one for cross fencing. I think that if you're on, especially somebody else's ground, and there isn't a perimeter fence, which there probably isn't, I think I'd probably still want two for a perimeter. But there's no reason why you couldn't split it with a single wire. I mean, that is the one advantage cattle have over sheep is that like a well placed, very high zap wire will keep cattle in, and sheep would just go bloop, and that's the end of that. So there you go.
Awesome. Thanks. We have Jeanette Jackson from Glidden, and she's wondering what kind of infrastructure, fences, panels are needed to unload and unload the sheep.
Oh, okay, cool. So there was actually, I'll leave this up. So unloading is the easy part for most livestock because you open the door and off they go. The loading part is far more complicated. And let me see yeah, you can kind of see it. So again, now if for cattle producers, you would have some way to get them back on the truck. But that is a serious consideration for sheep producers. So it's hard to see it here, but what that is that leads to that ramp is a mobile yard. And so it is built to be moved. This particular one is a Vino, which is, I think it's out of the Netherlands. There is a dealer here in Ontario. We bought it. It was probably like our first big purchase for our solar grazing, was this Vino, and it has paid for itself over and over again because we use it for everything. So it basically is just a chute with a swing gate at the end. The panels that you see are aluminum. They accordion. They tack onto the sides of that. There are wheels, and then we hook it on our truck and we go. Chris can set it up in under 15 minutes, and you can just continually add panels. So we have to round the sheep up into a single group, which they flock really well. They want to be all together. We round them up and we use those aluminum panels. Some It is tricky if you can't get everybody in one group. So sometimes we have to use, an external, let's say the side of a barn, or we have to hold some of them, load a truck, wait for the truck to come back, round the rest up, bring them in, and go. If we're doing 2 trucks at a time, but it is a consideration that it's easy to drop animals off. It is less easy to pick them up. So you have to have a plan for how you're going to get them back on the truck. There are mobile handling units for cattle as well, for sheep. And then there are people that are very, they don't mind sort of building their own, with cattle panels, etc., of building their own sort of funnel and using it that way. Because I will say, like, this is one from the sheep perspective anyway. It is well worth the money, but they are not easy to get because we don't make them in Canada, that I would call a truly mobile yard. They have to be light, they have to be roadworthy, and they have to actually work. And so usually we're looking at like a UK company, a New Zealand company. They have to come from overseas, so there aren't a lot of them around, but they're available. You just have to actually find the dealer and bring them in. And once you have one, I had actually one producer just today say, I'm trying to find a used mobile yard. I'm like, you will not find one because once you have one, you do not let it go until you retire. And that's just all there is to it. They're just so useful. So, yeah, we do have herding dogs. Good herding dogs are worth their weight in gold. Um, it all depends on how you would normally move your livestock. But yes, if it's sheep, mobile yards with light panels makes all the difference.
Awesome. Thank you. Stuart has another interesting question I'm actually really interested to hear your perspective on.
Okay.
So one barrier he's had is the resistance to animals on land
Yes.
with kochia for fear of spreading the seed.
Hmm.
Producers would rather till, cut, burn kochia than graze and risk seed spread. Is this a real risk, or does the evidence exist that grazing kochia is not a significant seed spread risk, or is it?
Okay, so that is a great question. And the answer would essentially be it depends, which is our favorite. Realistically, if there's viable seed, and that happens incredibly early, right? So for some of these species, if there's viable seed, um, even mowing it is still going to spread seed. Now, will an animal spread it further? Again, it depends. Does it fall into their wool and then they walk further and then they lay down and a seed fall? Like, I guess, like theoretically, yes, it's possible. Um, that being said, we've had really good luck of using sheep to, because once they ingest and those seeds go through a rumen, there are a lot of seeds that can't survive that. There are some that can, for sure, but for a lot of weed species, if they're consumed, going through a rumen completely annihilates them and you don't have to worry about it. Um, I mean, I guess it's there isn't an easy answer. I would love for someone to do a research project on it, Stuart, so write that down. But to me, it would be like, could you exactly that do a pilot? Like limit it to one field. But in my mind, then you have to say, okay, can we actually map where is the kochia now? And then can we map next year, did the kochia move? So it can't just be anecdotal. So I can see definitely where there is pushback. But realistically, if a farm is mowing it, you have to be mowing it very early and then again, right? Because it will just start to regrow from the branches. And once it sets seed, like it sets seed very quickly and those seeds are viable. So I think mowing's a great idea, but it's not necessarily the cure, right? Like it is not a one and done. You're going to be continually going after it. But for many, like we've dealt with we deal with wild parsnip here. It's really quite amazing that they actually eat it. And it doesn't bother them, it doesn't hurt them. And we were concerned about that with even feeding bales. Like we bought in some feed and we roll out our feed. But for the most part, because it's once it goes through the rumen, it's pretty rare to find it. Rare. I'm not saying I'm not the Kochia expert. So, Stuart, I will actually make some calls, but I would say that's where a pilot project would be fantastic.
Who are kosher experts these days? Like
Yeah.
I'm like, who are you gonna call? Like where do we get this?
Yeah, there's a couple. Although one of them is moving out of the country. But yeah, we have a couple researchers that would know. Like Dr. Charles Geddes out of Alberta would probably know. At the same time, how many of them have put it through a rumen to see if it has viable seed? I would guess none.
Yeah.
So we'll work on that one. Anyway.
Jeanette was wondering, you mentioned grazing crop residue, but then really didn't
Yes.
talk about it much.
Okay.
Is just that an option?
Yes. So yeah, we do it. It is every year that we've done this, so like 5 years, which no, it's not a long time, but we are definitely not the first and only people to be grazing crop residue or crop aftermath. So we typically it would be corn stalks. At this, I do know people though that would even just on just the regrowth of a wheat field, like a barley field, whatever. If there's regrowth, and the wonderful thing is, the sheep eat any like weeds that have germinated, or those perennials, or those fall germinating weeds. They will eat them. So there is a weed impact for sure. Corn stalks. The sheep do incredibly well on them. The water need is higher. We do monitor body condition score, but if you've got a certain brand of combine that you don't like, if it did the harvesting, there's usually lots of grain left over, and they pick that right up off the ground. But they eat the leaves, they eat the cobs, they pick the cobs clean. That any of them that are left. The key there. So again, water needs usually higher because it's drier feed. You may need to supplement different mineral or more mineral just based on what the relative feed value is. And corn stalks are a giant pain to fence in. So that's where, again, if you're trying to do it with like nets or like hand rolling things, you're probably going to hate your life. But if you've got a decent way to drive and get those fences up, that does make a huge difference. Because definitely one of the challenges with corn stalks is the corn stalks themselves getting tangled in things and being a pain. So, yeah.
Okay, we do have a couple more questions. Maybe we'll see if we can get through as many as we can here. I don't want
Sure.
to keep you too late here,
Yeah,
Lyndsey,
it's
because
all right. We're
it's
good. This is
bedtime. So
this is the fun part.
the
Is
partnerships,
everybody, yeah. Okay, go ahead.
the partnerships you've created with other farmers.
Yeah.
Is there a certain type of farmer that you're finding is more open to this? So retired
Yes.
farmers, young
Yeah.
farmers willing to try new concepts, regen farmers, soil enthusiasts. Like, is there a certain neighbor to contact first?
So that is fantastic. And I wish I could say yes, but when I think about the farmers that we work with, they all come at it from a slightly different angle. So um one of the farmers we work with, again, he's not retired. He's yes, they go down to Florida a little bit. So like he's older. He did retire from dairying, but he still is a very active grain grower, and has quite a bit of land and has no intention of slowing down. But because of that, though, like he had dairy for years, which means he was spreading manure for years, which means he knew what his crops could do when he had manure in the rotation. So I think for him, and he will tell you flat out that he is incredibly impressed with now having put grazing, so putting manure back in rotation, has been a benefit to his yield since. So for him, that particular farmer, he knew the value of having manure in rotation, and this is a really low. low labor way, he can get it back in and he can still go to Florida. Um, the other farmer that we work with, he is definitely interested in soil health. Definitely, interested in reducing tillage in an area where we have a lot of tillage. So he's doing things a bit differently. Um, but and that I think was key, is that he was willing to try things, and he understands. He again doesn't want to have any livestock, but he understands the impact that livestock would have. And then the other grower is somebody who will always do things differently and does crazy things. And so this it did not surprise me in the least that he was like, "Hey, want to try swath grazing? Because I have swaths. You should come get them." So yeah. So again, if you don't ask, the answer is always no. At the same time, um, you probably know who around is maybe they have land that they are trying something different, or you notice an area where they always struggle to actually grow something, and maybe it would be better if it were in a perennial forage for a couple of years or whatever. And not coming at it from the, hey, I can solve all your problems, but coming at it from just a perspective of like, have you ever thought about maybe putting that into, an annual forage, and I would love to graze it, or those sorts of things. It's really coming from a place of like having a solution for something and seeing where it goes.
Makes sense. That's a great response. I think maybe we'll do one more question. This is a good question. As a grain grower, how do I know if our land is being grazed appropriately, too much or too little?
So great question. In the sense of, what I love about this though is that you kind of can't do it wrong, in that if you're grazing aftermath, the point is to clean it up. If you're grazing a cover crop, the point is to clean it up. This isn't rotational grazing to maintain a hayfield or a pasture to become more productive. The grain is the main part. The grazing portion is really more about cycling nutrients than it is about maintaining a perennial stand, right? So we treat our rotationally grazed ground differently than we do the grain ground. And not that, and what I mean by differently is we're not going back, right? Like once we cover it, it's gone, it's done, it's late in the year, it's not, it might regrow a little, but for the most part, it's not. So we don't have to worry about overgrazing per se. Now, at the same time, it should not be a muck bog, meaning if animals are left and there's no feed left and they're tearing up the ground, that's too much, right? But realistically, the whole point is to make use of what's there and then move on, and you're not going back to it. So that would be the main thing, is that obviously, that they're not tearing up the ground, that there's obviously water provided. But the goal really is to clean up, to eat any weeds that are there, clean up any residue that's there, and cycle it, but leaving the soil surface intact, right? Like, so yeah. So that really to me is, that would be where somebody isn't moving their animals enough. And always keep in mind, like if you run into a very wet season and say it hasn't froze yet or whatever, like it might mean you have to move the livestock when there's still feed there, because you're just making a mess. So like that is one of the considerations and from if I'm the grain grower, I don't want that ground to get completely mucked up, because even though there's feed left, it probably just means the season's over and you have to make that call.
Awesome. Well, I think we'll maybe wrap up here. There's been some great dialogue here in the chat too, and great questions. We got to most of them. If
Sure.
there's any questions that we didn't get to, feel free to reach out. Lyndsey's got our email address
Yes,
there.
please do.
Thanks so much for all the questions. They were excellent. Thanks so much to you, Lyndsey, for sharing your knowledge and experience with us. A reminder that the webinar has been recorded, and we will send the recording to all of you out after when it is ready. If more questions come to mind, again, please don't hesitate to reach out as well. If you're not a SaskSoils member, we'd love to have you join our community and do more of this as well. Memberships are a great way to stay connected with upcoming webinars, field days, learning opportunities, and the latest soil health resources. So we do have a soil health resource portal where we do publish articles as well. We will likely do one with Lyndsey after this. You can also follow us on social media and subscribe to our newsletter to stay up to date on future events. So thanks again, everyone. Have a great rest of your evening, and I hope to see you at the next webinar.